Yıllar boyu yayıncılara telif ödemesi yapmayan ve haber içerikleri üzerinden tek taraflı para kazanan Google ve Meta'ya karşı dünya çapında bir ayaklanma başladı. Özellikle Google birçok ülkede yayıncının hakkı olan ödemeyi yapmaya mecbur bırakılıyor. Bu ayaklanmanın öncüsü sayılabilecek olan ülke ise Avustralya. Avustralya 2021 yılında hem Google'ı hem de Facebook'u dize getiren ilk ülke oldu. Ülkedeki tüm medya şirketlerinin desteğiyle Avustralya medyası pazarlık yasası çıktı. İngiltere ve Kanada başta olmak üzere birçok ülke Avustralya yasasını baz alarak benzer düzenlemeler çıkarıyor. Google ve Meta'yı yayıncılara ödeme yapmak için masaya oturtan dönemin Avustralya Rekabet ve Tüketici Komisyonu Başkanı Rod Sims bugün süreci, yasayı ve sektörde meydana gelen değişmeleri anlatmak üzere bizlerle. Mr. Sims, thank you for joining. You're known as the man who forced Google and Meta to start paying for news. After Australian code, Canada recently introduced similar law. In the US, news publishers are lobbying hard for similar rules of their own. The code was formulated by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission when you were chair. So, how did the process begin?
The process began when the government gave the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission a direction to do an inquiry. That meant that the ACCC could use its information gathering powers, where it would say to Google and Facebook, you've got to give us information and it's a criminal offence if you don't. These are the same powers that the ACCC would have if it was pursuing an enforcement case for somebody breaching merger laws or cartel laws. And the ACCC could use its compulsory information gathering powers then without any, it's a completely independent organisation. But when the government, but we can't use them to do an inquiry. We can only do that is, what's going on here, what would we recommend needs to change, as distinct from enforcing competition law. So an inquiry is all about have a look at this and come up with recommendations for government. So it was the government that asked us to do this, and in doing that, they allowed us to gather information, which was, of course, essential.
Okay, then what changed in the industry since the law came into effect?
Once the law came into effect, first of all, both Google and Facebook resisted the law. Google said it would take Google search out of Australia. Facebook said it would take all news off, or all news media, media businesses' news off the Facebook news feed. And for a week, Facebook did that. That led to negotiations with the government, which I was also involved with. And what was agreed is that if the platforms, Google and Facebook, went out and did deals with the media companies to a sufficient extent, then they would not be designated under the law. So the law's passed. If they're designated, they're required to negotiate. And if they can't negotiate a deal to the satisfaction of the media businesses, they can be taken to arbitration. So that was the process under the law. But to kick that process off, you need to be designated. Facebook and Google so hated the idea of being designated that the Treasurer said, well, if you go out and do deals and you do enough of them, then I won't need to designate you. So they did that. And within 6 months, both of them had done deals with about 85% of Australian media. And after another 6 months, Google had probably done deals with just about everybody. So they did the deals very quickly. They were comprehensive deals because they took a lot of negotiation. And the result was that the media companies were happy with the deals, which was the main indicator I was looking for. Are they deals they're comfortable with? And between Google and Facebook, they're paying well over $200 million Australian a year. It could be closer to 250, I don't know. We don't know the precise number, but we know it's well over 200. So it's between 200 and 250, maybe closer to 250 a year to media businesses in Australia. That covers about a quarter of the cost of journalism across Australian media. So it's a significant contribution to news media businesses. What we noticed when the deals were done were two things. One was there was a 46% increase in ads in newspapers for journalists, so huge demand for journalists. And there are a lot of journalists I knew who were saying to me, there's never been a better time to be involved in journalism in Australia than since this News Media Bargaining Code was passed. So it really did have an important effect on boosting journalism in Australia and put a lot of money into media businesses.
I believe over 30 commercial agreements inked between Google and Meta. Were the agreements unlikely to have been made without the code?
Oh, the agreements would never have been made without the code. No, I mean, there was a couple of very minor deals done before the code, but they were with small companies and they were small amounts of money. And those companies regretted that they hadn't waited for the code to come in because they would have got a lot more money. So no, that without the code, Google and Facebook would have effectively paid nothing.
Can we call the deal successful then?
Oh, I think the code was completely successful. The amount of money paid was roughly what we thought it might be. The companies are all happy with the deals. So I don't really see under what heading you'd say it wasn't successful. Let me step back. The whole point of the code is that the media businesses need to be shown through Google and Facebook, but Google and Facebook don't need any particular media business. So there's an imbalance in bargaining power. So it's impossible for the media businesses, that approach Google and Facebook for payment, and they would get told, no, there's nothing they can do about it, no. But when the code came in, obviously you had that threat of arbitration, which means you can't dismiss somebody because they can take you to arbitration. We thought the threat of arbitration would get the deals done. It turned out the threat of designation got the deals done, but we got the deals done and the companies were happy. So that has to mean it's been 100% successful.
The code is not all about copyright, is that right? Can you explain the importance of the bargaining power?
Yes, it's got nothing to do with copyright. We deliberately didn't go there because we didn't want legal argument over what is copyright and what is not, which would be endless. Copyright then requires somebody to determine what's the appropriate payment for copyright, and we didn't know how to do that. So all we wanted to do was even up the bargaining position so that deals could be done. And knowing ultimately that you can take someone to arbitration is what evens up the bargaining power. The arbitration we chose was final offer arbitration. So if it went to arbitration, both sides put in their best bid and the arbitrators choose one of the two best bids. We did that because we didn't see how an arbitrator could arbitrate in a normal commercial way, because the platforms would have said the value is nothing. The media businesses would have said it's $1 billion, which some of them were saying, and the arbitrator would not have had the information, because there's not much information around, to work out what the right answer is. So having a bargaining process with a forcing device, as I say, was meant to be arbitration, turned out to be designation, got successful deals done. And the reason they're successful was because the media businesses were happy with them. Google and Facebook signed up to them. So you had commercial deals done where you couldn't get them done before. So the arbitration was meant to deal with that market power.
So how do Google and Meta decide how much they should pay publishers? Do they have a formula?
We don't know how they did that. And the reason it's complicated is it's really got nothing to do with how much advertising Facebook and Google do against news media items. I mean, if you If you look for running shoes, you'll get running shoes ads, and Google and Facebook will make money. If you look for news on COVID or the Ukraine war or the Middle East war, you're not going to get ads. But it keeps you on the platform. And the more time you're on the platform, the more likely you are to notice ads. So it's a holistic service. So Google is running a search engine. You can't run a search engine without being able to answer questions about the Ukraine war or the Middle East war. So it's all part of the service, which makes Google search attractive. And so what value you put on that is hard to know. I did go public as chair of the ACCC and just muse, and I did this deliberately. And I said, look, if they're paying just 5% of the cost of journalism, if that's what these deals amount to, that's nothing. That's trivial. That can't be right. On the other hand, if they're paying 50% of the cost of journalism, that sounds to me a bit high. So I put that out there, and lo and behold, the deals came in at 25% of the cost of journalism. Now, how much what I said influenced the outcome, I do not know. As I say, what I do know is that both sides were happy with them. Some of the media companies complained that they didn't quite know how much to ask for, but most of them did and were happy to get enough of what they asked for to be very satisfied with the process. So I don't know how they did it. But to be clear, if there wasn't the bargaining imbalance and these companies just normally negotiate these things, they'd do it by their own criteria. And I wouldn't know anything about it. The government wouldn't know anything about it. The public wouldn't know anything about it. So I'm sure they both had their logic of how they did it, but it's not a logic that's public.
I think the most important aspect of the law that it gives bargaining authority to media companies. What will happen if Google and media companies couldn't reach a deal?
Then it would go to arbitration. If they can't reach a deal, it goes to arbitration, and it's final offer arbitration. So, Google would have to sit there and say, I can't make a ridiculous bid. I can't offer nothing, because the media company might put forward that you owe me $50 million. And the arbitrator is going to say, well, I think 50 million is a bit high, but the nothing is nothing. So I'll go with the 50 million. So they're forced to come up with something realistic.
You mentioned that it was passed into law despite threats. Did Google and Meta push hard to block it? How did you resist that against them?
So every political party in Australia was in favour of the code. All the media companies, which are very powerful when you put them together, were in favour of the code. So that gave the government a very strong position. So when Google said that if the law is passed, then they will take Google search out of Australia, and they made that threat publicly, Microsoft chief executive rang our prime minister the next day and said, we will bring Bing to replace Google. We will invest in Bing and make it a great service. Google changed their mind rapidly. They did get changes to the law, but they weren't of consequence, except that they were never designated because they went off and did enough deals to avoid designation. So that's the big concession they got, but it wasn't a concession the government worried about because we just wanted commercial deals done. So that was Google. Facebook, without any warning, took down all news off Facebook sites, but they overshot. They made a big mistake. They also took down bushfire warnings, and we have bushfires in Australia every year, as you may know, have had forever. We had bushfires in Western Australia. The Facebook warnings about those bushfires just disappeared. There were health warnings going out, COVID and other things. They just disappeared. So there was enormous public backlash against Facebook. A whole lot of people saying this is just awful behaviour by Facebook. So they both threatened, but the government was in a strong position because it had the backing of every political party and it had the backing of every media business in Australia. That's pretty strong position to be in.
Cool. And finally, do you have any advice for Turkish publishers?
band together, get an Australian law passed, make it all about money. But the key thing is the media has got to come together and lobby as one. Because if you have breakaway groups, that'll be the end of it. We've got papers to the right of centre, we've got papers to the left of centre. They normally wouldn't agree on anything, but they agreed on this. And so the media coming together as one is the crucial step.